How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Allowed's guide series on Waterdeep Dragon Heist, a 5th edition module. In today's video, we're going to be wrapping up Chapter 1, and we're going to meet some friends and foes along the way. Of course, there's going to be a ton of spoilers, so players don't watch this, but DMs that want added insight on how we can run this thing, go ahead and stick around, because there is a lot to cover. So your players have followed the clues, and they know to go down to Candle Lane, and there they see it, the warehouse with the snake on the side. So what do? They naturally start going around and investigating. Obviously, this is where a lot of people's groups are going to diversify, whether they go ahead and be loud and proud, or if they go ahead and start sneaking around the place. So let's look at the map and look at the details of this Zhentarim Hideout. So this is what we're working with. We have a 2-story warehouse with a yard by the side, and there seems to be only 2 doors, one of which being an actual door and one of which being a warehouse door. But there also appears to be several windows. But one of them is on the first floor and seems to be blacked out, and the other ones are on the second floor. So your players are probably going to think of several ways to go ahead and break in here. Let's go ahead and look at all the details. So if your players start finagling around the place, they can see that either of the doors can be opened with a DC 12 Thieves Tools check, and they can be forced open with a DC 10 Athletics check. However, if they go down the athletics route, that is when they're going to start making some noise because they are presumably bashing doors down, and the Kenku inside are going to become aware of their presence. Now, if your players start bashing their way in, the Kenku are going to hear this, and they're going to go ahead and hide behind the crates nearby. But if anybody has a passive perception of 16, they'll be able to hear these Kenku shuffling around the place. Hopefully that might give your players some added insight as to, the environment that is going on in here. Now, your players could be very creative. They could go ahead and maybe try and force open a wall somewhere using some elaborate scheme, or they could go ahead and try and scale the wall there on the side and make their way through one of the windows on the second floor. Go ahead and change up the scenario as need be, but it's more than likely people are just going to go ahead and open up the front door because that's the most simple outcome here. Go ahead and when your players open up that front door, tell them what is going on. You should immediately express to them that this place is a bloodbath. There are bodies of a dozen men along the walls, and it's pretty gnarly stuff. And something very important to note is those bodies are of Xanathar and Zhentarim agents. And also, after this scene concludes, or if your players immediately bash down the door and they see the Kenku, you can go ahead and show them off this awesome image of these, random PCs making their way in and these Kenku getting ready to jump them. Now, something very important to remember here. We are at level 1. Your PCs have next to no HP. They only get 1 attack. They get next to no spells. Very limited resources here. So we do not have these Kenku fight to the death. No, if these Kenku get injured, they will try and run away, or they will go ahead and surrender. It states here in the text that the Kenku fight until 2 of them are incapacitated or killed, whereupon the survivors try to flee. A successful DC 10 intimidation check forces the captured Kenku to divulge what they know. And there you can go ahead and show off the fun role-playing aspect of Kenku, where they speak in different accents depending on where they've heard this certain line before. Now, once again, I highly encourage that if any Kenku gets injured, immediately they go ahead and just drop their weapons because in level 1. Level 1 is a very scary process for everyone involved. These Kenku, they theoretically could wipe the floor with any number of PCs because level 1 combat is just so swingy. Once your players have dealt with the Kenku and potentially captured any of them, they can get this great information. The Xanathar sends its regards, so they know for a fact that these Kenku are aligned with the Xanathar. And most important of all here, this is the really big info. Tie up the pretty boy in the back room. Follow the yellow signs in the sewers. This is going to lead them further on, and this is what is going to get them all the way to Floon. And also, a very nice little nod here is no time to loot the place, just get him to the boss. If you tell your players this, they may think to themselves, oh yeah, there's just no time or whatever. But if they glean any information from that, and they start looting around the warehouse, they'll be able to discover a pretty nice treasure hoard. Now, in Area 2, the storage closet, once your players have dealt with the Kenku, they may start exploring around this place, in which case they'll go ahead and hear that Renaer is in this closet. Now, if there is a fight that actually goes on and the Kenku are actually talking and it sounds like the Kenku are defeated, it would make sense that Renaer would just go ahead and pop his head out and see what's going on, even if they were, other agents of some other faction, because he probably thinks to himself that he can get out of this terrible spot. Renaer is going to introduce himself to the party and say, hey, my name is Renaer Neverember, and here is what's going on. And this little spiel here, this little text block that you're going to tell your players, this is what ropes them in to the full-blown campaign. Yeah, they just started this little manhunt for a guy named Floon, but because they interact with Renaer Neverember, that is what ties them to the Stone of Galore, to the Vault of Dragons, and to all the other factions that they're going to be interacting with in this campaign. It is very important that your players buy into this whole thing. Once Renaer Neverember says, the Zhentarim thinks that my father embezzled a large amount of gold while he was the open lord, and then he hid the dragon somewhere in the city. They think they can find it using the artifact called the Stone of Galore, which was recently in the hands of the Xanathar until recently. Apparently someone stole it. The Zens thought I knew something about it, but I don't. My father and I haven't spoken in years. This should be the key to this whole campaign. Your players build a trust and rapport with Renaer Neverember, and then they learn a bit of this information. They learn that there's a huge storage of gold somewhere. They learn that there is some key that named the Stone of Galore, and they know that there are major factions involved in trying to get this key. That should really drive them forward in the entire narrative here. But also equally important here is Renaer is going to say, hey, my friend is in trouble. We need to go get him. They took Floon because they thought Floon was me. And Renaer's going to go ahead and pick up some weapons and say, hey, we got to get my friend, let's go. And with that, your players should be getting on their way to the sewers. However, if they start poking around the place, especially if they think that there might be some loot here, with a DC 15 perception check, they'll be able to find that there is a false wall here. And in this secret room that they'll uncover, there they can find beautiful, beautiful paintings, 4 of which, each of worth 75 gold. But also importantly is a second crate filled with 15 10-pound silver trade bars, each worth 50 gold. That is a lot of gold. But also very important is that'd be freaking heavy, and it would be pretty big. So it's more than likely that people would not be able to get away with it. Now this is all at level 1. So your players are going to be, freaked out if they see that there's this much gold potentially here, because they may think it's some sort of trap or something. There actually isn't any trap here. But what they'll uncover later on is they're going to need a lot of gold for that house that they'll be inheriting here. But of course they don't know that yet. Looking around the place some more, they'll be able to find more junk all around. But in Area 5, they'll be able to find something very interesting. A paper bird, a unique item to this campaign. A paper bird, just like this image describes, is something where you go ahead and write down a letter and it'll start flittering off and it'll fly to anyone nearby that you desire. It's a pretty cool way to go ahead and get your message out there. Obviously, magic in regards of, a sending spell or something is probably a lot more convenient, but paper birds are just a, not so intrusive way, I guess, of interacting with people. After your players have thoroughly looted this place or looked around and found Renaer Neverember, that is when the watch is going to arrive. The guards got tipped off that there was some suspicious activity around here, so they went ahead and gathered a nice little raiding party and stormed the place. It is led by one Captain Stagit. So you should make this painfully present that this is going on. And something I found is not everyone is always keen on this. So here are some of my suggestions. My first recommendation to change up this encounter is have this be on a timer. Instead of the guards arriving immediately after finding Renaer Neverember, go ahead and say that there is a timer, that after so many minutes after your players storm the building, the guards arrive. The second way I would go ahead and possibly change up this scenario is to go ahead and make the guards arriving very well known. Instead of it just being they just all of a sudden appear right there, they're just, right there in their faces, have it be announced that your players will be able to hear the clitter clank of metal coming from down the street, and they'll be able to see the torches, and they'll be able to hear the guards sound their horn, and that gives your players enough time to run away should they desire. But if you're running this as written, then the guards are going to arrive, and they're going to begin interrogating everybody here, and they're going to be questioning what's going on. Now, thankfully, this guard is not as, up and up on the law as everyone else. He's going to see that there's a bunch of dead Xanathar and Zhentarim members, and he's going to let it slide, especially if he sees Renaer Neverember, because he's going to recognize that Renaer is a royalty, and he should be on his best behavior. So, yes, your players may have committed crimes such as, murder or whatever the frick else, but, he'll let it slide. He'll just say, yeah, I don't care about these criminals dying. Now, of course, your players are still on a quest. They are on a quest to find Floon, And if they know that gangs are involved, they may think to themselves, hey, let's go ahead and tell the guards about this. But the guards are not going to respond in kind. Captain Stadget is going to say, yeah, I'm not going to send my people down into the sewers. Because, realistically, yeah, I mean, why would he, right? This might be just some weird tip of some kind. This may be a trap. And he recognizes that these sewers are very dangerous. He says, yeah, best not to meddle in criminal affairs. Not all City Watch officers are as nice as me. And keep the blood off of the streets. Now, depending on the kind of games that you run, maybe you go ahead and let this slide a little bit. Maybe you go ahead and do offer some guards as a service for the players. But I would not recommend any veterans, because veterans are just going to outshine the party in every regard. Maybe you go ahead and allow for a few guard stat blocks. Or another recommendation would be to have several veterans accompany the party, but you change up the encounter later on in the Xanathar Hideout. Instead of it being constantly with the party, maybe the group gets split up as the veterans go off one direction and the party goes another. Once your players have conversed with the guards and they leave this area, your players will be free to chase after Floon down in the sewers below. However, your players may not have uncovered that information. Maybe all the Kenku got killed, or maybe your players weren't intimidating enough, in which case they're going to have to start asking some questions. Your players will have to make a DC 15 investigation check, or bribe some people nearby to get the information about where the Xanathar guild members stole Floon away. Uncovering this information, they will find that there is a cover to the sewers, and they'll easily be able to find the way to where the Xanathar is going. Now, as your players are navigating around the sewers, they'll be able to uncover tiny carved symbols on yellow chalk, and these are what look like a cog. Obviously, we know that it is the Xanathar because it is a round thing with 10 stalks. But if you don't have people that are nerds in D&D, they may not know what the Xanathar is. Unfortunately, however, Xanathar's Guide to Everything somewhat spoiled that for a lot of people. So, I guess it's kind of out of the bag. Now, as your players are navigating around following the Xanathar symbols, after an hour of following the signs, they will come to an intersection and they will find a gazer that is looking around and, just acting as a patrolman. The gazer will just go ahead and bare its fangs and start striking out at the party. Thankfully, gazers aren't terribly dangerous. More often than not, they just annoy people rather than actually hurt them, because whenever you're rolling to attack with them, you simply roll at D4, and hopefully you don't roll a 3, because doing 3d6 points of damage would really hurt someone. And speaking of hurting someone, that's what I wanted to get into here. This kind of makes it seem like this is all going to happen in one night. However, this is level 1. Your players could get incredibly unlucky in any one of these two fights here and be completely drained of resources. They could have no health, no hit die, no spells, no nothing. In which case, your players may decide to take a long rest. There is no punishment written out here for taking a long rest. And I wholeheartedly agree, because there isn't enough resources to punish them. You should definitely save that for a later level. So I would just go ahead and say that, nothing changes if they take a long rest, but maybe make them still feel like there's a sense of urgency here. Continuing along, your players will get to the Xanathar Hideout itself, and it's here where we get this intricate little design here. The Xanathar loves going into all these places and, basically just hollowing them out and making them their own. Now, your players may be loud and boisterous and love to announce themselves, but maybe go ahead and have Renaer suggest that they go about it stealthily. Because in Area 1, here, the central hub, if your players are stealthy enough, they'll actually be able to spot that there are some goblins that are taking a nap around here, and you only need a DC 9 stealth check to make your way past these goblins, which will make life so much easier. Now, as your players get to that intersection, they'll be able to see that there is 2 arrow slits here, each of which is being occupied by a goblin that's not really paying too much attention. And they'll be able to see that there is only one door that leads to further in the Xanathar Guild. However, if they're feeling rather, explorative, they'll be actually able to uncover that there is, in fact, a secret wall there to the south. That secret tunnel could, in fact, help out in avoiding some of the combat encounters around here, but if your players just see a door, open up a door, then it's not really that big of a deal. Now, as your players go ahead and start sneaking around this place, they may go ahead and just get the drop on any goblin they come across, in which case, just go ahead and allow them to get the kill, because if multiple people, stab into a sleeping person, they're probably going to die. But something important to note here is, of course, they may not be stealthy. And if they are not stealthy, then this could be a big deal, because these goblins being in arrow slits is going to be a huge, huge deal. They'll be able to shoot arrows out into that little corridor there. The goblins are going to have cover, meaning that their AC is higher. And of course, some groups may not have ranged options. So this could be a very bad death funnel if they do not get through here quickly. Hopefully, if you have a loud party, they storm through the door, make their way up into that goblin, and make sure that he cannot escape. Now, as your players make their way through here, past Area 4, the sleeping area, it's when they get to the door to Area 5 is when you should go ahead and make there be some noise. When your players make their way to the door, you should go ahead and tell them that you hear yelling coming from the other side. And this yelling should be coming from a dwarf, and this dwarf, Zemp, is going to go ahead and yell and scream, "We have to bar the door!" So if your players press their ear up to the door, they'll be able to hear some furniture being shuffled about and some yells and screams. If they decide to open up the door, there they'll see this Duergar is basically just propping up a whole bunch of things to this door up to the north. Now, why is that? It's because this Duergar just saw a goblin get eaten alive by a gray ooze in the lavatory. So the Duergar, it isn't going to want anything to do with that. He's just going to go ahead and lock this thing away. But also important to note here is the fact that Krentz is here. Krent, you might remember as being the leader of that Xanathar gang that was beating up on Yagra, or more like Yagra beating up on them. Now, the Duergar is going to fight to the death here because he is loud and boisterous and he fears repercussion. However, Krent is just a normal guy and he doesn't want any part of this. If he sees that the fight is turning sour, he's going to run away. Now, hopefully, you expressed great effort to the point where this Duergar was, in fact, trying to barricade this door. If your players get this inclination to go ahead and rip away all the barriers to that door, then I guess props to them. They open up this door, and wouldn't you know it, a gray ooze is just going to come on out and attack the party. Gray oozes are absolutely no fun. They definitely get the no fun seal of approval, as they are going to jack up any party, and more importantly, they're going to jack up the party's weapons. Very, very bad at a low level. Pressing on, your players will be able to see a terrible sight. When they make their way up into this area, they will see that Floon, this poor individual, is getting beat up by Groomshar, a half-orc wizard who is, basically just trying to prove himself to Nichlor. Nichlor being a mind flayer that works for the Xanathar. Now, if you have an experienced group of players, they're going to see that at level 1, they're going up against a mind flayer. This is BS. This doesn't make any sense. Well, actually, Nihilor isn't going to stick around for this. Nihilor is actually going to test Groomshar, and Nihilor is just going to go ahead and walk away when the combat occurs. Nihilor is just going to go ahead and make his way through that door to the left, make his way into Area 11, and activate a magical door that will appear, in which case he'll go ahead and teleport away. But your players should be a little bit more preoccupied than trying to fight a Mind Flayer, because they'll be going up against a wizard and also an Intellect Devourer. Very, very scary, once again, at level 1, especially if they have drained resources. So as soon as your players walk in, Groomshar is going to let out a boisterous yell and attack the party with all of his magics. And of course, the scary part about him is being a half-orc, he has that feature that means that if he drops to 0 HP, he actually drops to 1 instead for the first time. So he will potentially stick around in the fight later. But the Intellect Devourer is the scary part of this whole combat. The Intellect Devourer could theoretically zap someone's mind and put them out of the fight. That is very, very bad. That is why it is good to have Renaer Neverember be a part of the fight here, because Renaer can take some blows in lieu of the party. Now, your players deal with that terrible Groomshar and that evil Intellect Devourer, and they may go ahead and decide to try and loot this place. In which case, there's some pretty decent loot to be found here. They can go ahead and wrap up everything else, and they can also look around and see, hey, that Mind Flayer kind of just like disappeared. What's up with that? And thankfully, they won't have to deal with that because, once again, level 1 should not be dealing with Mind Flayer. So they'll go ahead and start looting around this place, find some gold, and also, interesting enough, if they spend a decent amount of time looking around this place, they'll be able to find several doors that lead to other residences around here. In Area 9 here, your players could find themselves in the residence of the Peabodys. The Peabodys are going to be like, what the heck? And they're just going to go ahead and say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and seal this thing up. Screw having a little tunnel to the sewers. That sounds terrible. And then all the way down there in Area 12, we have the Hostile Cellar. And this is really bad because this is home to the Shard Runners, a halfling were-rat gang. Pretty scary. Hopefully your players aren't feeling, fighty, because theoretically a were-rat would be unkillable at low levels if your players didn't have any magic, because, if your players don't have silvered weapons, they're not going to be able to deal with lycanthropes. Now, of course, your players come here with Renaer Neverember. They deal up with all the baddies in this location, and there they have Floon Blagmar in their possession. They can see that Floon is horribly beat up, and Floon is going to be eternally grateful for his rescuers, and of course his dear friend. Floon is going to accompany the party, and hopefully your party makes their way back to the Yawning Portal for them to meet with Volo Thamkadarm yet again. Now your players have finished the quest. They have Floon in their possession. They make their way to the Yawning Portal and find Volo, and it's there where they uncover that Volo totally wasn't going to keep his end of the deal. He did not have enough gold to give everyone to the party, so he's going to go into this spiel and say, I confess, I have only but a few coins to spare, but how about this? I give you a deed to a remarkable property here in Waterdeep. This is where the campaign truly is going to start shining. Volo is going to hand over the deed to Trollskull Manor. However, handing over property isn't as easy. You do have to get it signed over by a magistrate, which your players will be able to do on the following high sun, or basically the following noon. And with that, an easy little estate transfer tax of 25 gold paid for by Renaer Neverember, or more importantly by Volo, your players now have in possession a deed to a property in the lustrous city of Waterdeep. Volo, Floon, and Renaer will now be considered friends of the party, and they will be excellent people to draw upon inspiration for so many awesome quest, story hooks, and beats throughout this entire campaign. Between these three individuals, your players will be able to meet with people of high and low society all about the city of Waterdeep, and these people are going to be what really drives this campaign forward, and especially because they'll be able to meet so many more NPCs. After exploring the Xanathar Guild hideout and completing the quest, your players will reach level 2, and this is once again where the campaign is truly going to start really kicking off. Your players will now be in possession of the beautiful Trollskull Manor located high up in the North Ward, a pretty beautiful place. Of course, once your players actually discover what this place looks like, they may be a little peeved, but hey, property is property, and that will be covered in Chapter 2. That's going to do it for the Chapter 1 though. So go ahead and tell me, what do you plan on doing with this chapter? Are you going to run it purely as written and get them through so you can get them all the way to Chapter 2? Because Chapter 2 is where the campaign truly kicks off. Are you going to do some alterations to the Xanathar Hideout or to the Zhentarim Hideout? And most important of all, how are your players going to react to the awesome revelation that the deed that they've been given is a pile of crap? Go ahead and tell me all these things because I want to know. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my awesome patrons up here. You guys are so very incredible. Thank you so very much. That is going to do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.